Broadcasting live from the moon and back, this is The Coin Chat, the most trusted voice for all things cryptocurrency. Each week we dissect an important issue and cut through the noise and misinformation out there in the world of blockchain, cryptocurrency, and ICOs, capturing the facts that truly matter to you that will give you an edge in this fast-moving emerging market. The who, what, where, when, and how of what you need to know in crypto to get ahead so you don't get left behind. Now here are your co-hosts, financial and crypto experts Yuri Cataldo and Steve Good.
Hey, this is Steve Good.
And Yuri Cataldo.
And we're back again on the Coin Chat to cut through the noise and misinformation in cryptocurrency to tell you what really matters.
Exactly.
And I had to modify the way I said it once again because you know how important it is to keep changing it up a bit.
It totally is. And today we're talking about consensus. And what is that?
Yeah, so consensus is really interesting because I was thinking about this. I did a bit of research, and I know you did as well.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I found really interesting. There's no consensus on what consensus is.
True.
I mean, I think there is in terms of mining, but there's actually, to break it down, I think there's 4 types of consensus that we really should think about and just kind of cover off briefly today. So one is the one that we hear about the most, mining. The miners' consensus, do they agree with each other? Second is developers, because there's big developer communities, especially in open source. Third is the user communities themselves, who could also have consensus and vote and agree on things. The fourth are investors. So those are the 4. I thought, why don't we just talk through a bit of each of these a little bit, one by one, and just kind of provide our community, our listeners, our viewers today a little bit about, well, what is consensus?
Sure. And why does it matter? Yes.
Well, I don't know. Why does it matter?
Why does it matter? Well, it matters in a little bit way because blockchain is decentralized. There has to be a way to move ideas forward. So since there's no central authority, somebody has to make a decision. And so how do decisions get made?
Yeah. So the interesting one for me has always been the miner one, because miners making decisions about how a network works, they have a lot of power because they're doing the mining. You see this is quite prevalent in the Bitcoin community, where miners will decide whether or not they want to upgrade the network, make certain changes or not. And of course, the reasoning behind that oftentimes is whether or not they're going to make more money or less money in terms of mining. So when they mine, how much are they going to get? And whether or not the network and protocols that are being, proposed are going to benefit them or harm them. So that's not exactly the right reasons for the decision making necessarily, because it doesn't benefit us. Because as you know, we all would like to have a faster Bitcoin network. We'd like it to be able to do more transactions within shorter periods of time. And arguably one could say that for the miners in the Bitcoin community, if they make half as much money, but they do 4 times as many transactions, they just double down. But it's very hard for people to see it that way. But that's ultimately the mining problem in terms of mining consensus, is getting the miners to agree to changes in the protocols, which will lead to forks oftentimes, as we've talked about before. But it's about, can we get them to agree to make the changes?
Right.
Then the second one is the interesting one, is the developers who are making the proposed changes. And they say, hey, we've got a great change. Let's put the Lightning Network into Bitcoin, for example, because we'd like to be able to make this thing faster. And the miners go, nah, bad idea. We're making good money as it is. So now you've got this conflict. It's like, these guys battling each other saying, yes, I want to make this network faster. No, I want to make more money. And now you've got the battle of the consensus between developers and miners. But ultimately, the goal should be for the improvement and the benefit of that network to work better. So those two, I think, are quite, interesting in their own rights, because there's a lot of different protocols in mining, as you know. And for developers, they have to get agreement and consensus to make changes to the network. We've seen examples of that with the Ethereum network, where the hard forks that took place over time with Ether were effectively the developers having the power to make the decision to upgrade the network and not to fork the network in such a way that it caused any sort of split or chain, other than for Ether with Ether Classic, due to the DAO, which was some historical stuff that took place, which we'll put the reference to that in our YouTube so people can click back to that. So then that takes us to the other two, no one talks about, which is, I think, more interesting.
Yeah.
How come us users who get to use the platform are never mentioned in any of these papers on, Hacker Noon or in Medium articles about consensus? We get to vote on stuff. We get to make proposals. We get to have our say. We get rewarded for participation in the project and get coins. How come no one mentions consensus of users to put proposals forward on projects to make the projects go forward and make change?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. I don't know. I actually haven't ever seen that. And I wonder, in your experience, are there actual coins that are and companies reaching out to their users and make changes accordingly to that? So, like, do they actually have a say in some of these?
Well, so here's the interesting thing. I mean, I've seen a number of projects over the last year that went from, let's say last year, 2017, we saw a lot of projects selling 35% of their coins to the public. 2018 has all been about 50% and above. Mm-hmm. Now, that's interesting alone because we're talking about more than 50%, and 51% is usually the definition of consensus because you need 51% in order for the vote to go through. Now, when I look at the projects selling the coins, many of them have these charters or concepts or ideas that they want to do two things. One is they want to reward their users with more coins for participation in the project. And the other, of course, is they want them to be involved in more like a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. But in order to achieve that, you need to create a platform in order for those people to make proposals and vote. And that's the part that I don't see happening.
Sure.
And then, of course, then there's the other side of, these projects where you create the proof of stake and masternodes. But then again, that's just the mining voting itself. It's not really about the users voting. So sticking to the user side, sure, there's a lot of discussion I see around user communities, bringing the users together, getting them to be rewarded for participation, allowing them to get involved, to vote on things and to be a part of a decentralized organization. But I don't see any evidence of it actually occurring, or very little. So little that I can't name something off the top of my head and say this is an obvious one, like a new project in the last 9 months or a year that's so obviously all focused on consensus of the users. So, of course, the difficulty with that is governments want companies to be formed. They want the ICOs to be registered companies with a CEO and a COO and a CTO and developers and all that. And that's totally contradictory to blockchain, which is all about creating organizations and teams of people. So I don't know, Yuri, what do you think? Are we actually in a world where we're heading into this world of contradiction or world of conflict between what is really decentralized and what is centralized?
Well, in that process, then yes, we totally are, because you're right. There's the weird catch-22 is, in order for governments to take some of these companies and cryptocurrencies more seriously, they want to be able to regulate them, or they want more say in them, which means they have to be more regulated and there has to be less decentralization of it. So in that sense, yes, if in order, at least in the beginning anyway, to allow some of these to succeed, they have to.
Yeah. So I'm finding this.
Find it.
Yeah. I'm just finding this to be a contradiction that we more and more are selling increased number of coins. We're selling more than 50%. We're talking about creating decentralized organizations, and yet I don't see any evidence there's very little written up about voting or voting rights or consensus-based rights. Now, frankly, a lot of people want that. And people are jumping into projects because of their belief that they get to have more coins, they get to have more involvement, they get to have more of a say, which would almost be like voting rights, like shares, although they're not shares, but still in a decentralized world, we can still vote for the direction of a project. But just not enough of that happening. So the interesting one. So the fourth one, moving quickly forward to the fourth one, is investors. Why is it that investors? We as investors, now I know that users are the users of the platforms, they may also be investors, but investors themselves, why is it we don't really talk about investors and their say in terms of having some form of consensus around the direction of projects, other than, dare I say, creating these cartels in EOS?
Right.
I mean, it's a form of voting. I'm not sure it's really the direction we want to head in, but I mean, just really realistically, I mean, I guess, investors tend to have more money. They tend to be buying more coins if we're talking about the investors. And I find it interesting that we don't talk about them as, having an influence on the direction of projects, although behind the scenes we're selling private, coins privately and such. So,
I mean, they may behind the scenes, but you're right. There's not a lot of talk about publicly them having made decisions or influencing in one way or another.
Right. So those were the 4. Those to share with everybody. I just wanted to bring those out, Yuri, and for us to have a quick chat about them and bring them out for everybody to think about it. Get some comments down below and in our channels, because I'd really love to hear other people's opinions and thoughts on what do they think consensus really is, what should it be, and where is it going?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for listening in. We'll be back soon. To the moon. Until next time.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today on The Coin Chat. Join us on Telegram on t.me/thecoinchat, where we discuss a range of topics on cryptocurrency. And visit us on patreon.com/thecoinchat for show notes, outtakes, and previews of additional content. Or follow us on our website, which is www.thecoinchat.net. And remember to like and subscribe to us on your way out. To the moon. Until next time.